Hi, hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Stage Manager Supply Co. podcast. We have no sponsor this episode, but instead are brought to you by Signage Arrows. Signage Arrows, multiple ways to mess them up, and only a select few ways to get them right. My name is Claire, I'm still your humble host, and thank you for joining me today. As we start every podcast, I would first like to say that Black Lives Matter, and that I am creating this content on the traditional lands of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux tribes. We will always start the podcast acknowledging the inequitable landscape and history of the United States, including but never limited to the fact that we are a country built on stolen land and developed on the backs of slaves. Stage Manager Supply Co. is my own attempt to bridge generations of systematic racism and oppression by making stage management arts education much more accessible. Today, I would like to highlight the Black AIDS Institute. The Black AIDS Institute, founded in 1999, is the only national HIV/AIDS think tank focused solely on Black Americans. Their mission is to stop the AIDS pandemic in Black communities by engaging and mobilizing Black institutions and individuals in efforts to confront HIV. They provide information on health policy, train individuals in best practices, and offer technical assistance, all from an unapologetically Black point of view. If you would like to learn more about the Black AIDS Institute and donate what you are able, you can find the link to their website in the description of this episode. Two disclaimers before I introduce today's guest. Disclaimer number 1. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, that's me, Claire, and the guest, and do not reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, production, organization, employer, or company. Disclaimer number 2. The host does not presume to be any sort of singular voice for stage management or stage managers. The views and opinions expressed by the host are extremely limited to the scope of her own experiences and are being widened each and every day. So, now that we've grounded our work in the reality of the world around us, let me introduce you to today's guest. Our guest today is Jhanaë Bonnick. Jhanaë is an incredible, kind, and hilarious equity stage manager based out of New York City, with an impressive resume of credits. Select credits include PAing and sub-ASMing multiple shows on Broadway, including Caroline or Change, Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus, 6 Degrees of Separation, Hadestown, and The Cherry Orchard. She was the original PSM of Slave Play off-Broadway at New York Theater Workshop, and then the stage manager on the Broadway run. She has worked as a PSM at Ars Nova, Soho Rep, and Signature Theater. Jhanaë also has experience working on various readings and workshops of new work, including Lumpika at both Williamstown and La Jolla Playhouse, Saved by the Bell, the musical, and many more. My personal connection to Jhanaë is that one time she let me fill in for her for a one-week reading for about 4 hours, and the musical that they were workshopping was so good that I cried. Jhanaë, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. That musical made me cry too.
It was so good. I hope it is able to find a home post-pandemic because that's an awesome story. I don't want to spill too much.
Yeah, no spoilers.
No spoilers. First and foremost, how are you holding up during quarantine?
I'm doing okay. I'm holed up in Brooklyn, in my apartment with my roommate, and we've hunkered down. We've had lots of apartment projects. We've reorganized the kitchen about 3 times.
Amazing.
Our bookshelf looks amazing. We bought new plants.
Your plant game is very strong, I will say.
Thank you. Yeah, we went shopping a little bit ago, and now it's like we can feel this, like we are in an oasis of green.
I do want to ask you right off the bat, you were working on Caroline or Change as a production assistant when the pandemic kind of shut down Broadway. And if I'm correct, it was supposed to be your first preview.
Invited dress. It was invited dress.
Wow.
It was crazy, the story of how it happened, but I think, I mean, I'll speak from my own experience, but I think kind of all of Broadway was watching and feeling this like impending doom. Like as that week went on, it was a Thursday, like I'll never forget, as this like impending doom feeling came of like, are we going to be able to go on? What's happening? Also, because of the timing, everyone was trying to open in time for Tony eligibility. So there were
Yeah.
lots of shows that were in that area of like final previews or going into previews or invited dress kind of land. And yeah, kind of all week we were like, okay, we made it one more day. Maybe it'll be okay. We made it one more day. And we got to work that day and we could just kind of feel it in the air. And one by one, we were on breaks looking at our phones and the Lion King announced and then this show announced and that show announced. And it was only a matter of time really until the company, it was really, I think, a matter of getting the artistic director to the theater itself in order to hold a full company meeting and let us know. And yeah, because it was supposed to be our invited dress, and at first the rules were really about people gathering, it was also a question at the time of, are we going to do our invited dress so we get one more run in and like have this moment, or are we going to go home? And who could have known that the night before would have been our last run for however many months until we return.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. But also Janine Tesori was there, and like everyone was there. And so it was also kind of this incredible moment of community that we were all like, we're doing what we need to do for our health and our safety of ourselves and the community and the world. And that is actually a beautiful thing and just as beautiful as doing an invited dress tonight. So
Yeah. Wow, you put that so articulately that in the moments of what feels like tragedy, there is beauty that can be found in it. Wow.
yeah,
That hit
it was
deep. That
amazing.
hit deep for me. I have chills right now. Um, so I want to take it back a little bit
Yeah.
before COVID, before we even knew what that was. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in theater. What was your first kind of foray? Was it when you were a kid? How were you an actor? What did you enjoy doing?
Yeah. I've always loved kind of music and art. I played the clarinet very seriously in elementary school, and I was always in choir. And in fourth grade, we did a musical at my high school. I'm sorry, my high school. In fourth grade, we did a musical at my elementary school. We did Once on This Island junior in the fourth grade, and I auditioned and I didn't get in. But the director was like, I need someone to help me. Just make sure that everyone is ready and that the scene, and I like, now looking back on it, it was like, oh, I was a production assistant in fourth grade. And so the next year in fifth grade, we did Guys and Dolls, and I did the same thing, where I was just kind of his helper. And then musical theater kind of fell out of my life for a middle school or so, but late high school, I started doing community theater again. And I was in the shows, I was in the ensemble of shows. And partway through, I was like, I feel like there has to be there's like a job we're missing because it feels like there should be some person who's like a central organizer and has specific duties. And so we had a stage manager, but I think I really learned at that community theater what stage management was because what we were calling stage management wasn't quite it. Um, and so I learned it there, and then I went to college and I was like, theater's fun, I'm gonna be a lawyer. That didn't happen.
Where did you go to college?
My college journey was a bit odd. I started at SUNY Geneseo. I did 1 year there, and it just wasn't quite the right fit for me. Also, because by the end of my freshman year, I was like, well, I'm doing theater. So, and it's a great school, but their theater program is not what I would say of the SUNY system is kind of a biggie. SUNY, for anyone who's listening and not in New York, is the state universities of New York. And so I went to Geneseo for a year and then left and got my associate's degree at the community college locally, Dutchess Community College. And then I transferred and ended up getting my bachelor's degree from SUNY New Paltz, which is also kind of near where I went to high school. And yeah, so I got 2 bachelor's degrees at New Paltz, one in theater and one in English.
Wow. I have two kind of sparks that I want to ask you there because
Yeah.
I feel like there's a prevailing thought or myth, one may say, that if you don't go to a conservatory and if you don't go to one of the top 3 schools, that you will never work in this industry and blah blah blah. And looking back, I believe that is so far from the truth. I If I could do it again, I would be like, go get an associate's, go to community college, save money, and then go somewhere regionally that you want to be. So was I want to ask about your decision to get the associates and then doubling in English. What was behind that?
Yeah. So for the associates, yeah, it was a combination of like save money because your first 2 years of college, everyone takes the same classes. So why spend significantly more money to take the same classes when you don't have to? And also I think I too, was told that you got to go to these big 3 schools if that's what you want. And so it was also, I think, for me, hedging my bets of if I get my associates, that's another year to save some money and to decide which of those schools I want to go to. And I think that by the time the decision was made to which one I would apply to from my associate's degree, I kind of came to the conclusion for myself that the name of the school will only get me so far, and that my work is what's going to continue my work. And so if it means I have to work ever so slightly harder at the beginning, at the end of the day, that is going to even out.
Yeah.
So that's why I ended up going associates into state school, because I said I know that or I felt at the time that kind of my jump off into the industry would be harder. Um, but I just took that as read, I think. Um,
Yeah.
when I started. And the English degree is twofold. One is because I had the associate's degree, I was almost done with my English degree when I transferred. And so I was like, well, I might as well finish it. Um, but also because I tricked my parents, who were like, if you're going to do the theater thing, you need a backup. And I said, what about an English degree? Which, like, let's put an asterisk on that and say that that is not a viable backup. But they bought it. So that's how that happened.
Amazing. I mean, what's the Avenue Q song? What do you do with a BA in English?
Theater.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So something you mentioned was that from choosing a skate school, you knew that you were going to have to work a little bit harder to jump off into the industry. Can you talk about what your early career was in the industry and how did you kind of find like your first mentor in the entertainment world?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I have one of those stories that like kind of seems insane.
Tell
Because
it. Give
my
it to me.
yeah, because so I graduated in December. Getting 2 degrees meant I needed an extra semester. And I graduated in December, and because of who the staff at my school was, I immediately kind of got this jumping off point. I went to Vermont to a new theater company that no longer exists. I think it existed for this one year.
Heard.
And I
Heard.
PSM'd a production of Fiddler on the Roof in February in Vermont. That was very interesting. But I learned a lot. And I met some really incredible people. And then I came back home. That was February to say March. And I went back to my parents' house and I emailed my advisor and I said, so how do I do this whole like work thing? Like, what do I do? And he was like, you just do it. Here's the name of a friend who works at a school in New York City that trains, it's the New York Film Academy, which interestingly enough has a musical theater department. And so they do a show every year and every semester, and they needed a stage manager. And so kind of my kicking off point into New York was my advisor connecting me to someone who was directing a show for this school. And I commuted from my parents' house upstate. I was very, very lucky that a 2-hour train ride and 30-minute car ride could get me to Manhattan. And so I just did it every day, and it was long and it was hard and tiring, but I did it. And it paid like it was like a 3-month job that paid like $1,500 for all 3 months or something. It's like it paid for the train tickets or something.
Yeah, exactly. By the
Um,
end of it.
yeah, but it was a foot in the door. And kind of one thing led to another from there. And so I was kind of getting a bit of traction in terms of like that leading to an internship at the Public because of someone that knew someone, and that leading to like another really small like off Broadway show where I could PSM. But as much as that was a lot of my grounding in theater in New York, what I actually would say is like the origin of kind of my whole career is that I took a chance and I put my name on this Google Doc that was going around years ago, and it probably still exists, of people of color theater artists. And it's truly you put your name and your discipline and where you live and where you could live if you could have alternate housing, and what you do, and like a link to your resume, and you go with God. And I put my name on that list, and fast forward 2 years ish into just kind of hustling and trying and working. And the stage management team for Hadestown at New York Theater Workshop was, I think, in my opinion, and we could ask Lindsay, but in my opinion, was looking to diversify and make sure that people were being represented on the team. And so they emailed everyone on that list who identified as a stage manager and lived in New York, which as far as I know was like at the time 70 something names, and offered all of them an interview to PA. And I interviewed and I got it.
Yes.
And so I PA'd Hadestown at New York Theater Workshop in 2016 for its off-Broadway run. And that is where I met one of my biggest stage management mentors, two of my biggest stage management mentors, Shelley Miles and Lindsay Turtletaub, who were the stage management team for that show. That is where I got my equity card on that show. We extended long enough that people had to leave and things changed, and I got my equity card and bumped up to take the assistant position. That is the show where I met Rachel Chafkin, who is now one of my biggest collaborators. I work with her a lot. I work with her theater company a lot. She's also just like one of my favorite humans. And the same goes for my relationship with New York Theater Workshop. I've now PSM'd for them twice since then. So actually, as much as I'd worked and been grinding and doing things for 2 years prior to it, Hadestown was kind of like, now I am like working in New York in a way that makes sense, in a way that my parents could stop helping me, in a way that felt like what we think of as the story of starting to work in New York.
Yeah, I have so much that I want to ask you about in the 3 minutes that you just spoke. So I got to take a second to collect. Number one, if that document still exists, and I will put it in the episode link, episode description, because that's amazing. Second, Lindsay Turtletaub, friend of the podcast, also a huge mentor of mine. I want to talk about the Hadestown process, since you brought it up, from going to PAing to being a replacement ASM, which is amazing, and getting your card. What was it like then, moving the show to Broadway? Did you guys know at the time that the show would have a future in Broadway, and were you preparing it for them? And then did you end up interviewing for the Broadway production? Was it for a PA role? Was it for a production contract role? Like what was the whole Broadway move process?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say this is that like the process of a show going to Broadway is like really weird and really convoluted. And so everything I am about to say, I feel like I have to put a disclaimer on it. It's like everything that I'm about to say is a combination of my opinion and like small snatches of information that I know to be concrete.
Sure.
But yeah, so PAing it downtown, I knew nothing. I was very green. Like Lindsay and Shelley really taught me almost everything I know about being a stage manager in two very different ways. They just are kind of the bedrock of my stage management is the two of them, and Cody Bernard Richard is like how I know how to do my job. And so PAing it and then moving up, what became clear to me in the move up was that the show had legs in terms of people outside of us who are making it love it. It there was already thought going into like, oh, the things that we want to change or the things that we know we want but can't have here. Um, so I think that the thought of it moving on was always in the works. I also think that that's kind of often the way that theater is made in New York, is that if it's remotely interesting, and if it has the right people, it's almost always looking to move, because at the end of the day, it's an industry and that's a financial decision in a lot of ways. And so if someone is willing to back it and thinks it will make money, it can go. And I think all of those stars were indeed aligned for Hadestown in 2016. And the show, it ran for much longer than it was supposed to, and it kept extending. And then we closed. And when we closed, we made sure that, yes, everything was like, all the documents were made and the book was great and everything was like ready. And then time passed. And then there was a workshop that I wasn't involved in, but that I believe Shelley did. And so over the course of the next few years, there were workshops and sessions with it that Lindsay or Shelley or myself were kind of always involved in. And then it went to Canada, which from a stage manager perspective, none of the stage managers went, but that is relatively normal, that when a show goes to another country, stage management is not involved in that, at least not in any big way. They may go, if it's an immediate transfer, to like teach someone, or if it's an immediate transfer for a short run, they may get to go. But for the most part, when a show leaves, especially a country, it does not take the stage management team. And so it went to Canada, and it came back, and we did some more workshops. And I was involved in some of those. I PA'd one, I PSM'd one. I PSM'd the one right before it went to London. And it went to London. And again, no one from the stage management team went. And then it came back from London, and it was clear it was going to go to Broadway. And I actually, as much as I loved the show and the people and had been involved at this point for 3 years, nothing is guaranteed, especially on Broadway. And so I kind of, I said, well, there's so many people I could email and message and ask for an interview in terms of Lindsay, whose involvement I didn't know what it would be at that point. The director, the music director, they're just, at that point of working on it for so long, I kind of knew a lot of the players, but also knew that with the amount of Broadway experience I had, the likelihood of me being interviewed for a staff position, I shouldn't say that, production assistants are staff, but a contracted position was relatively low. And so I think I bided my time a bit too much, and I should have sent an email, but I didn't. But actually, this was all kind of happening at the same time as Slave Play downtown, and Rachel Chapman was at our opening, and she pulled me aside and she said, "When are you interviewing?" And I said, "I have no idea, Rachel." I'm interviewing. Cool. I didn't know.
Great.
I also think that was just kind of an assumption on her part that those people who had been with it would continue with it. I did end up getting an interview. So between Rachel and just my previous involvement, my name was given to the eventual production stage manager, Beverly Jenkins, who did bring me in for an interview. And my interview was for if I'm remembering correctly, it was for an available position on the team, and the positions available were both the second assistant stage manager and the production assistant positions. So the interview was open-ended. I hoped it would have been for a contracted position, but realistically, it was for any of the three and very likely to be a PA. And that's how I ended up PAing it on Broadway, is that I interviewed with the new stage management team, and then end up PAing it there.
There's this kind of catch-22 of you can't really gain Broadway experience at a, equity production contract level without having any experience already doing that job. Even though you may have done the same job title, off-Broadway. So it interests me, especially with your Slave Pit experience too, of going from PSMing at New York Theater Workshop to SMing then on Broadway. I don't know, like, are there things that you can say about that you feel comfortable being on the record about, or?
Yeah, no, for sure. What I'll say is that I as someone who's been on both sides of this catch-22, I understand it from both sides. So I think it's important for me to say that I logically understand what is happening on either side of this issue. However, I think that yeah, it is fully gatekeeping in terms of you can't uh, you in terms of PAing is an entry level position. Um, but if you enter a PA position as someone who has the institutional knowledge of a production, it can feel, even if no one else is purposefully giving you those vibes, it can feel like I don't have the autonomy that I used to have in this exact room with these exact people. Um, and also, I was in the case of Hadestown, I was well aware of the difference in the position of PAing and not. And so it is not to say that anyone on the stage management team of that show ever purposefully attempted to make me feel in any particular way, but it was hard not want to get in the way, but also just I don't want to get in the way, but I do know this thing because I've worked
Yeah.
on it for 3 years, and I don't want to seem rude, but if you do it like this, it will help you in the long run, and I don't know how to explain it to you. I just know because I know the show, and um, and it's everything is from as big to things about the show to even just like I know these people. I've known these people for 3 years, and so even out in the beginning of the process, we'd be sitting, stage manager sit, and it's like PSM first, second, PA, and I'm sitting and trying very hard to be a PA because when you're hired as a PA, like that's the job, and your feelings and understandings of the show beyond that kind of don't matter. Like, do the job you were hired to do. And so I understood that and was working really hard to do that. And I think on the flip side of that, or not the flip side, but that at kind of it's like the same thing happened later that same year in kind of a different capacity, which was I PSM'd Slave Play Downtown, and then it moved uptown, and I was bumped back to the SM position because of at least my understanding. I don't know that anyone said this blatantly, but because I had not PSM'd on Broadway, I was not allowed to PSM on Broadway. Um, which again, it's like on the one hand, I understand. On the other hand, but I have PSM'd this show. And in the case of Slave Play, it is a very specific show with kind of a very specific set of needs. And other than understudies and our leading actress, the company was the same. So I've also like done this specific show with this exact set of people before. Um, and so to be told that despite all of my experience, not only in general, but with this exact production, did not matter in the scheme of the Broadway industrial complex, and that I would have to take what feels like a demotion, was both like, oh my gosh, it's my first time on contract. I'm so excited. And like, but why can't I do that job? you know?
Yeah.
It's complicated. It's complicated, but I think I keep describing it as the Broadway industrial complex because it is an industry and it's a job. And as much as we love it, doesn't make it any less work. It's work. And because of that, I think that's a part of what plays into this of like, if we were to take this out of the context of theater, because we equate that with fun and we equate that with, for whatever reason, not work, and you would put the same idea into an office, you're like, oh, I see exactly what is happening and
Yeah.
why that has to be the way that it is. Which is not to say that it's wrong, but that's capitalism.
It is definitely an industrial complex. I 1,000% agree with you.
For sure, for sure. And I think that while it doesn't make it right, and this is a whole other podcast episode where I talk about capitalism, but like that's just it's capitalism. Like we live
Yeah.
in a capitalistic society, and capitalism again, like that that disclaimer you gave is very good because this is just my opinion.
Yeah.
Like capitalism is trash, and like that is why some of these problems exist, because capitalism dictates that the person who has more experience is better for the job despite XYZ and the third reason that this person might deserve it. Capitalism dictates that it doesn't matter because of all of that. So it's like and I think that's why I'm like, I understand why and how that happens,
Yeah.
and has happened to me multiple times. I totally get it. Is that there is actually, it's also frustrating because as much as I understand it, it is also frustrating because there is actually language about this in our union contract that says how much experience you need to have in order to qualify to be a stage manager on contract on Broadway. There is a rule. It's in there. And for the purposes of slave play, Hadestown I will set aside for various reasons, but for the purposes of slave play, I qualified. And you have to have done a certain amount of work off Broadway or on Broadway or in specific regional contracts in order to qualify to stage manage on Broadway. And I met that like 2 times over. So it was also, I think, a bit of a like, I get it, but because within the context of the contract that you abide by, I also qualify there. So like literally the only difference between me and the PSM, who by the way is a lovely woman and I have nothing against her, but with it, but the only difference between the two of us is that she is older than me and has done more contracts.
Yeah.
That is literally it. And if that is the difference between people who get work and who don't, the industry has a problem, because that means, and it's what's happening, the same 30 people are going to keep working, and we're going to build up a cohort and a horde of people who are qualified and not getting to work.
Yeah. So something you just mentioned that I want to ask you about is when you do PSM, and Lindsay touched on this briefly in her interview as a hiring manager now, of finding artistic collaborators is great, and finding your group of people that you can work with and go show to show is great. The other edge of that sword is that we can fall into silos of not welcoming new people into our communities and utilizing some talents that we would have never known this person has or this person has. So when you form a team as a PSM, how do you go about forming your team to be the most beneficial to you as the PSM and the most equitable team?
Yeah, I think Beverly Jenkins said this, and I take it with me as this at the same time as I move it a step further, which is, she says, once I'm hired, the team is diverse. I am here, right? Which I say because I think that oftentimes people hear wanting to have more diversity on teams and get scared that that means no white people. And that's not what diverse means. Um, and I don't know if that's how Beverly means it, but that's how I mean it when I say it.
Fair, fair,
It's
fair, fair.
diverse because I'm here, and that means that I can hire with an eye to what this show needs, and what I need for this show. So if that means that a white person is the most qualified person, then a white person is going to get the job. But if there is room, if a white person and a person of color, or a person with some sort of disability, or a person who is qualified and just isn't getting the shots, are equally qualified, then I have a choice to make. So I will start by saying that. But additionally, I've been lucky enough to work on lots of shows wherein like it is a very diverse company of people, and so I have to think about, because stage management is such a landing ground for everyone in the company, I want to, as often as possible, make sure that everyone on stage can see themselves in the stage management team, so that when, because it's not if, we are humans, when something comes up that you need to talk to someone about, maybe as a white man, whatever your problem is not something that you are entirely 100% comfortable talking to a Black woman about. And as a Black woman who frequently feels uncomfortable talking to white men, I have no interest in purposefully making a white man feel uncomfortable. So, for example, when hiring for slave play, I knew it's going to be a majority person of color cast, but that there would be one white man whose job was really hard. Every night, his job would be really difficult. And I wanted to make sure that and it was really difficult, very specifically in relationship to a Black woman. And so I wanted to make sure that this man would feel like there was someone on the stage management team who he knew he wouldn't have to feel sick to even say the things that he wanted to say to. And so when I was hiring a team, as weird as it sounds in 2020, I was like, I kind of need a white guy.
Yeah.
I think that in order for this to feel safe for everyone, I kind of need a white guy. And
It's not funny, but the way you're saying
it's funny, but it is. And I said it to myself, and I called a friend and I was like, is this crazy? Am I crazy? It's 2019. Am I crazy? And she was like, if you had said that to me with no context, yeah, I'd be like, what the hell is wrong with you? The play's called Slave Play. but with the context of what you just said, oh, I totally get it. Yes, absolutely. There should be someone who is there every night, who watches the show every night, who he can talk to. Now, the person who was cast, Paul Alexander Nolan, is a literal angel. He's so wonderful. And it was never a thing. Paul came to me with whatever he needs to come to me for, both on and off Broadway. But I couldn't have known that when I was hiring. And so I did indeed. My ASM for Slave Play Downtown is Brian Bauer, who is a lovely gay white man, a brilliant stage manager, and who the two of us vibe very well personally. So I knew the team would work functionally well. And then also he served this additional diversity purpose, because actually in the case of this, the diversity I needed was a white dude. So yeah, it's like, it's to me, when I'm hiring, I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And then also just knowing what my strengths and weaknesses are as a PSM. I can't see straight lines. So like when it comes to tape out, like God help you, it's like,
Yeah.
the minutia of that kind of thing. It's like, oh, you like tape out? That's a big plus for me, because I don't,
You heard it here first.
Yeah, you heard it here first. Just if you interview with me, lead with you like taping out. It's really gonna set you apart. But yeah, and then it's about personalities. But also I think that I have classic middle child syndrome, so I tend to get along with lots of people, and so it tends to be okay personality wise, and it's really just about a melding of skills and abilities.
Yeah. Something you touched on with slave play that I wanted to ask you about is intimacy and creating a safe space to do creative work. And I would love to talk about slave play specifically and what kind of measures you all as the stage management team took with that show, which was, I would say, intimate. I would say it's intimate.
Yeah. So for Slave Play, we had an intimacy director, Claire Warden, who is intimacy director extraordinaire. She's incredible. And we took a lot of our cues from her, and just in terms of how moments were treated, how moments felt. Because I think three things. One is that Claire says, and I love this, she doesn't strive to create safe spaces, she strives to create brave spaces, because it is in brave spaces that exciting and fun things can happen. And that often in the world and our industry, when we try to create a safe space, we stifle our creative input by trying to cut things off that maybe don't need to be cut off, but just need to be handled with care. And so brave spaces are caring spaces that are allowed to go there. So we kind of led with that. Another thing that Claire said on our first day of rehearsal for Broadway, that we literally printed signage that said this, speaking of being sponsored by signage. We literally printed signage that said, no, it's a full sentence. No is a full sentence. That is, if it's a no, it's a no. And when you're creating work like slave play, sometimes no has to be the answer. And sometimes that's no, not now, and sometimes that's no, never. But no is a sentence that doesn't end a conversation but can begin one. And so we literally printed it. It was like on the actor table to be like, you can say no. It's okay,
Yeah.
you know. And then the last thing is yeah, we approached intimacy as in the same way that you would approach any sort of choreography. Um, with the adjustment being that we always started with the smallest group of number of people possible, and closed the rehearsal space. And we covered the windows, and there was a sign that was like, do not enter tech stage management if you'd like to come in. And everyone knew that that was the protocol. So when we were doing intimate scenes, there was never a time when people were coming in and out. And yeah, we start with the small, it's just like the two performers, directors, choreographers, stage management. And we started small. It's like, keep your clothes on, obviously. And let's talk about where is a no-no? Where is a like, don't ever touch me here? Where is a like, yes, you can touch me there? Where is the this is a yellow light? Where we find the parameters of how we're comfortable with one another, because then you can play, then you can discover in the same way that you do in any sort of rehearsal process. And so we started there, and the intimacy worked just like choreography. It's a very like, okay, so then you're going to take this hand and put it here and hold it like this, and do and the blocking for that works the same way that intense choreography blocking is, where it's like literally like left foot outside of right leg. It's just very clinical. And you do it very slow. It's very much like doing choreography, it's mechanical, and you do it very slow until it's natural.
Yeah. And I would imagine then while you were, did you ever note the show while you were downtown? And I would imagine then that became something you would watch to note if, things were going off course or a little longer at certain points.
For sure, absolutely. And also, just like with choreography, oftentimes it's like the you start with the end result. You know what the next scene is and what the next moment is, and so sometimes you work backwards. And it was like, okay, well, what we need to do is you need to be kneeling, but how you get to kneeling is the adventure, is the thing we get to create. I think often people hear intimacy and feel like it's taboo, and it's like, ooh, we can't, but it's work. I mean, I think it goes back to that conversation of just like, we are at work, and right now our work involves, I have to put my hand on your thigh,
Yeah.
but we're going to do that in a way that we both feel safe and comfortable, and within the parameters that we've set, and that is what makes it okay.
Yeah, I think this conversation is so helpful for especially for people who may not have the ability to have an intimacy coordinator or the budget or anything, but thinking of it very clinically is definitely the way to go. We're running short on time, and I want to respect your heart out. But I want to wrap up by first saying if there's any other things or topics you would like to talk about, please go for it. And then if you have a production story that you think is fun, scary, quirky, awesome that you would like to share with us, I would love to hear it.
Yeah. I don't know that I have anything specific that I want to say to everyone, except that, like, I know that a lot of the people listening to this, that COVID and also Black Lives Matter are heavy on our hearts and on our minds. And I was talking to a friend today who is also doing a separate talk about stage management. And he said something that stuck with me. And when you said, is there anything else you want to say? I said, I'm going to say this.
Say it.
Which is just that I think at its core, a lot of what stage management is and is about is just about being a leader, whatever that looks like and means for you. And I wouldn't feel like a leader in any sort of way if I didn't acknowledge that, like, COVID and Black Lives Matter are happening right now, and that they're hard, and that it's complicated, and that we're all dealing with it. And that dealing with that can look hard. Or I guess not hard, but dealing with that can be messy, and that's okay. but that as long as we work with consistent intention towards whatever our goals are, we're gonna be okay. And I think that right now we're all feeling so separate on computers, and just you can't be with your people, and it can feel overwhelming, but like consistent intention towards your goal will get you where you want to be. And right now our goal is to be one again and be together and to work towards an anti-racist world. And so just like be consistently intentional towards that, from everything from like amplifying Black voices to like wearing your mask. We just have to do it all. And because we had an extra moment, I just wanted to say that.
Yes, please. And that if I could play that on a loop every day of just the phrase consistent intention, I might just like put that up on my wall. That's so I needed to hear that today. So I thank you for that.
It's my pleasure. But a funny stage management story. It's one of my faves. It's a Hadestown story. It's from downtown. Our closing night of that show was kind of crazy. But one of the ways that it was craziest was that there was like a flash flood or something. And so the show is happening, and two things about that show downtown. One is that we had to go outside frequently to make transitions near Theater Workshop. And so it's like you'd like exit upstage through the dressing room, run around through the other building, go outside up to the street, run on the sidewalk, and re-enter through a different door on the other side of the audience.
Amazing.
We made that journey several times, and there's a lot of fun and interesting like ASM to PA handoffs, so neither of us had to leave which side of the stage we were on, and running with umbrellas, and it was crazy. And so there was a flash flood, so we were like already dealing with that, with like, and Persephone's dress downtown was painted so it couldn't get wet. And so always being very careful with Amber and all of those things. It was an incredible night because we were closing and the energy was high and everything was crazy and it was raining. And then it's late in the show. And if you know that show, you know that like kind of later on in Hadestown, things get crazy and they get dark and they get quiet. And we are near the end of the show. Orpheus turns around and we're singing the final number, and it's like heart-wrenching, and then phones start going off because flash flood warnings on phone start like that big emergency alert sound is happening while poor Orpheus is like kneeling, and Eurydice is crying, and Hermes is like singing the final number, and the whole company is there. And just emergency sounds. I will never forget, I'm backstage, we're like, oh, we did it, the show. And Shelley Miles is calling the show, and she gets on comm and she's like, I can't believe this has happened. I just will never forget that moment. And you're seeing the audience like scramble to get their, it's because it's multiple people, obviously. Yeah. They're all scrambling to get their phones and turn, it was insanity. And it was like, of course this would happen during the show and during our final performance. It was wild.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when we say turn your phones off, we mean off.
Off. No, off. Don't go on silent. Silent doesn't work if there's a flash flood. I learned that in 2016 and I will never forget.
Oh my gosh. Jhanaë, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I learned so much about your life, and I got to con you into being my friend. So thank you for that.
I'm happy to submit to that con. Thank you so much for having me.
With that, we have come to the end of episode 4 of the Stage Manager Supply Co. podcast. Once again, brought to you by Signage. Signage. What do you mean they need to be double-sided? A huge thanks to Jhanaë for sharing her experiences with me, and a huge thanks to you for listening. One day, I will ascend and become the Howard Stern of arts education, but unfortunately that day is not yet today. The Stage Manager Supply Co. podcast is now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, so make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you again for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye!